I've always enjoyed taking long walks late at night. There's something about the quiet stillness that makes the world feel simpler. I've been a welder for over 40 years, and after spending all day in the shop, those walks help clear my head. I live alone on a large farm outside a small town in rural Montana. It's just me and my dog, Ranger. The house is far too big for one person, but I never had the heart to sell it after my wife, Eleanor, passed away. Cancer took her years ago, and not long after that, our kids moved out and started lives of their own. Since then, it's been just me and Ranger. One night, after a particularly long day of work, I decided to take my usual loop around the property. The air was cool, and Ranger trotted beside me, alert but relaxed. I've walked that same loop hundreds of times, but as I was heading back toward the house, something caught my attention. I glanced up at the second-story window the bedroom Eleanor and I used to share. For just a split second, I thought I saw something move behind the glass. I stopped dead in my tracks and stared up at the window. There was no reason for anyone to be in that room. I hadn't stepped inside it in years. The thought of a stranger inside my home made my blood boil. I rushed inside, my heart pounding, and ran upstairs. The room was empty, exactly as I had left it. I searched every corner, but nothing was out of place. I stood there feeling foolish, telling myself it had been my imagination. Yet the feeling that something had been there refused to leave me. The next night, I woke up to Ranger growling at the foot of my bed. He's a good dog and never makes noise unless there's a reason. I listened carefully and heard creaking from upstairs. It could have been the old house settling, but my mind went straight to footsteps coming from directly above me. The bedroom. I considered grabbing my hunting rifle from downstairs, but decided against it. I grabbed a flashlight and went up to check. Once again, the room was untouched. That's when my anger began turning into anxiety. Something felt wrong. The following night, I came downstairs to find the kitchen lights on. I knew I'd turned them off before bed. I never leave lights on. That was the moment I knew for sure someone was inside my house. Panicking, I called the police. They searched the entire place but found nothing. They were polite, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. The next night was the worst of all. I couldn't sleep, so I went upstairs to check the bedroom again, hoping it might ease my mind. When I opened the door, I froze. Clothes were scattered across the floor. Eleanor's clothes. I had packed them away after she died, and then I saw her. A woman stood in the doorway, staring at me. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I knew she wasn't Eleanor. She was shorter. She didn't belong there. Fear took over. Without thinking, I charged at her. She turned and ran down the stairs and out the front door. By the time I got outside, she was gone. I searched the entire property with Ranger, but there was no sign of her. I didn't sleep that night. For months after that, I was constantly on edge. Every sound set me off. I slept with my rifle beside my bed, convinced I'd need it one night. I thought about calling my brother to stay with me. But I'd been raised to handle my own problems, so I didn't. One night, while sitting in the living room, I noticed a figure standing in the yard, staring at me through the window. It was her. My heart nearly stopped. I grabbed my rifle and ran outside, Ranger close behind. She stood there in the moonlight, just a silhouette watching me. I fired a few warning shots into the air. It finally made her turn and disappear into the darkness. I haven't seen her since, but I know it's only a matter of time. Living in constant fear isn't sustainable, but I'm prepared to defend myself if I have to. Thank God for Ranger. I don't know what I'd do without him. If anything else happens, I'll update this story. I work for a catering company, which means I'm on the road constantly, usually late at night. Most of my shifts involve hauling equipment in and out of a massive delivery truck the company assigns me. It's not the worst job in the world, but the hours are brutal, and it's definitely not where I imagined my life would be. By the time I get home, I'm either so wired on caffeine that sleep is impossible, or I crash instantly and stay out for 12 straight hours. One night, around 2 a.m., I was finally driving my own car back home after a long shift. I knew immediately I'd had too many energy drinks. Sleeping wasn't happening. On top of that, I hadn't eaten in hours and my stomach was screaming. There's a 24-hour McDonald's right off the highway about 10 minutes from my apartment in the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. It's usually my go-to for late-night food, nothing crazy, just fries to satisfy that specific craving. When I pulled into the drive-thru, I was surprised to see a few cars ahead of me. It was a Tuesday night, well past 2 a.m., and this location is usually dead. While waiting, my mind wandered, and that's when I noticed something strange. In the far corner of the parking lot sat an old beat-up Volkswagen sedan with dark tinted windows backed into a space. The restaurant wasn't allowing indoor dining at that hour, and employee parking was on the opposite side of the building. It didn't make sense for that car to be there. I shrugged it off, assuming someone was just eating in their car, something I'd done plenty of times myself. I got my food and pulled out of the lot, but I didn't want to go home yet. I didn't feel like sitting in my car either, so I tried to think of somewhere nearby where I could eat. Just down the road from my place is a massive nature preserve built into the side of a mountain. At the top is a scenic overlook with a full view of the city. There's a service road that loops around the preserve and leads straight to the lookout. After hours, cars aren't allowed past a certain point, but it's still an easy walk to the top. I used to go there all the time in high school with friends talking, smoking, just enjoying the view. I hadn't been back in years, and the nostalgia sounded comforting. When I pulled into the gravel parking area outside the preserve, it was completely empty. As I turned off my engine, headlights suddenly swept into the lot behind me. That alone made my stomach drop. Then I realized what I was seeing it was the same Volkswagen from McDonald's. I was absolutely sure of it. I parked a little distance away and sat there, heart racing. What were the odds of that happening? Had they followed me? Nothing happened for about a minute. No music, no doors opening. Eventually, I tried to calm myself down, telling myself they were probably there for the same reason I was. Still uneasy, I debated leaving, but I didn't want to be alone. I FaceTimed my close friend Ethan, who lived nearby. If he didn't answer, I planned to eat my food and leave. Surprisingly, he picked up. He'd been up working on a college paper. I convinced him to come hang out, and he said he'd be there in 10 minutes. While I waited, I kept watching the Volkswagen. It never moved. When Ethan finally arrived, relief washed over me. We both got out of our cars and started walking up the path toward the overlook. Before the parking lot disappeared from view, I glanced back. The Volkswagen was still there, but now all 4 doors were open. 4 men stepped out and stood in a loose circle, just staring at each other. They weren't talking. It was deeply unsettling. I nudged Ethan, and before they could notice us, we kept walking until the lot was blocked from view. Alarm bells were screaming in my head, but Ethan brushed it off, saying they were probably just there to smoke. By the time we reached the overlook, the city lights helped calm me down. We sat on the stone barrier near the edge, eating and talking like we used to. That peace didn't last long. We heard voices and laughter approaching from behind us. 3 men emerged from the path, passing around what looked like a blunt. They seemed friendly at first, which eased my nerves slightly. Instead of finding their own spot, though, they walked straight up to us. One of them, the one holding the blunt, was heavily tattooed and had a nose ring. He smiled halfway and asked if we wanted to smoke. We both declined. One of the other guys laughed and made a comment under his breath. My curiosity got the better of me. I asked if they'd been at McDonald's earlier. The tattooed guy's smile vanished instantly. All 3 of them stared at us with cold, unreadable expressions. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. That's when I remembered there had been 4 men in that car, not 3. One was missing. I was ready to run. Ethan clearly felt the same. Finally, the tattooed guy lifted his hoodie, revealing a McDonald's uniform underneath. He said he worked nights and came up here after every shift to smoke with friends. It explained some things, but the tension didn't go away. We decided it was time to leave. As we walked back down the path, Ethan suddenly stopped and pointed toward the trees. I followed his gaze and saw the fourth man, partially hidden in the darkness. He was holding something, though I couldn't tell what. The moment he realized we saw him, he started moving toward us. We ran. We sprinted down the path, hearing footsteps pounding behind us. I didn't dare look back again. We burst into the parking lot, jumped into our cars, and sped off. In my rearview mirror, I saw them rushing back to the Volkswagen. I didn't drive home. I was terrified of leading them straight to my apartment. I called Ethan and we agreed to meet on his street instead. Thankfully, we weren't followed. The next day, since I had time off, we went back to the McDonald's to report what happened. We showed a younger employee the photo Ethan had secretly taken. His face went pale. He told us something straight out of a nightmare. The tattooed guy used to work there. His girlfriend had worked there too and had broken up with him months earlier. He didn't take it well. He stalked and harassed her during and after shifts. He was fired, police got involved, and a restraining order was issued. Apparently, he'd been violating it by camping out in the parking lot at night. I have no idea why he followed me that night, but it was clear he wasn't stable. It's been a week. I haven't gone back to that McDonald's or the preserve since. I just hope the police catch him soon, that he doesn't recognize my car anywhere else. Forgive me if I don't remember every tiny detail. This happened a long time ago. I grew up in a quiet town called Briarwood, Ohio, the kind of place where nothing ever really happens. When you're young in a town like that, boredom pushes you towards stupid decisions. In high school, a few friends and I had a habit of sneaking into abandoned buildings just for the thrill of it. At the time, I didn't realize how common that kind of urban exploration actually was. To us, it was just something reckless and exciting to do. There was one place we kept going back to, an abandoned church on the outskirts of Maple Ridge, tucked away on a side street that most people never used. I don't remember the exact address anymore, but the building sat behind a tall chain-link fence, probably 8 feet high. The church was unsettling, but it became our go-to spot for late-night scares. One fall evening, a group of us decided to break in again and drink a little inside. The air was cold and sharp, the kind that bites at your lungs. There were 6 of us that night: me, Rowan, Elise, Carter, Noah, and Brielle. We climbed the fence like we always did and slipped in through a side window since all the doors were boarded up. Once inside, the first thing that hit you was the floor, rather, the lack of one. The entire first floor was just packed dirt, as if the floorboards had been torn out years ago. In the center was a large opening with concrete stairs leading down into the basement. That basement was where we always ended up. It had 3 rooms. Only one had an actual door. The other 2 were just open doorways. We went into the largest room first. It was mostly empty except for broken chairs, old furniture, and a torn couch shoved against the wall. Carter had been drinking, and even a little alcohol made him loud and restless. I remember having to shush him over and over. Still, being in a big group made me feel safer. We joked around, drank, laughed, and maybe even played music, though I don't fully remember. Then, without warning, a door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the basement, so loud it made me jump. We all froze, staring at each other in silence. At first, I assumed one of us had done it by accident, but no one was near the door. Almost immediately, Elise, Rowan, and Carter panicked and bolted for the stairs, running back upstairs without a word. That left just me, Noah, and Brielle behind. We liked to think of ourselves as the fearless ones. My heart was pounding, but I didn't want to admit it. I told myself it was just the wind or the building settling. I could tell Noah and Brielle were thinking the same thing. Whether it was curiosity or pure stupidity, we decided to investigate instead of leaving. After standing in silence for a few minutes, we slowly walked toward the room with the door, the one that had slammed. Inside was a small space. The first thing I noticed was a dresser pushed against the wall. Sitting on top of it was a cracked mirror. Red stains were smeared across the glass. At first, I thought it was old paint, but when I leaned closer, my stomach dropped. The stains weren't dry. They had a sticky sheen to them, like whatever caused them hadn't been there long. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. That was the moment I realized something or someone had recently been in that room. Then I noticed a photograph lying on the dresser. It was an old black and white picture of a woman in a wedding dress. She was smiling, but something about her expression felt wrong. The entire room felt off, heavy, wrong. I stepped back, ready to leave, when we heard another noise. This time, it didn't come from the room we were in. It came from the large room we'd been hanging out in earlier. That was it. Noah and Brielle didn't hesitate. Neither did I. We grabbed our things and ran. We sprinted up the stairs, climbed out the window, and vaulted over the fence. Once our feet hit the pavement, none of us spoke. Before turning away, I looked back at the church hand. I swear I saw the silhouette of a person standing in the open window, watching us. I still hope, to this day, that my mind was playing tricks on me. None of us ever went back there together again. Years later, I did return on my own butt. By then, the church was gone, completely demolished. Whatever stood there that night went with it. I still don't know what we saw, just grateful my friends were there with me. If I'd been alone, I might have convinced myself it never happened at all. If anyone wants to dig into the history of that place, go ahead. I was never able to find anything myself, but I wouldn't be surprised if that church had secrets buried far deeper than its foundation. I'm 26 years old and live in a small townhouse complex on the far outskirts of a quiet city in Westbrook, Indiana. I work closing shifts at my job, usually getting off around 10 or 11 at night. Most days follow the same routine: come home, stay up late, and game online with my friends until morning. It was repetitive, but familiar. A couple of months ago, though, I had an especially stressful week at work and didn't feel like talking to anyone or logging on that night. At the same time, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up watching YouTube until about 2 a.m., bored out of my mind, before deciding to take a walk. I didn't walk often, but every time I did, it was calming. Especially at night, when the streets were empty and quiet. It felt like the whole town belonged to me. That feeling sounds creepy now, but at the time, I liked it. I grabbed a hoodie, locked my door, and headed out without any real plan. I started by walking out of the townhouse area and into a nearby residential neighborhood. None of us living on this side of town were well off, so the houses were old, plain, and packed close together, but it was still better than looping around the townhouses. Everything was silent. Every house was dark. For a while, it was peaceful and exactly what I needed to unwind. After some time, I realized I hadn't turned once. I'd just been walking straight. The street slowly narrowed and transitioned into a road lined with thick woods and houses spaced far apart. Most of the homes were barely visible behind the trees, with only an occasional porch light cutting through the darkness. The atmosphere was completely different, but curiosity kept me moving forward. I was about half a mile in when I heard a scream. It was a man's voice, and it wasn't a scream for help. It sounded more like someone shouting to get attention. With no other noise around, the sound echoed through the forest, almost like it was coming from everywhere at once. I stopped and waited, scanning the darkness. After about 30 seconds, nothing happened, so I kept walking. I had no idea what it was, and I knew I never would. Even without the scream, the road made me uneasy. The streetlights were dimmer and farther apart. The houses looked older, run down, and honestly abandoned. Even the pavement was cracked and broken, like no one had driven on it in years. I knew this side of town wasn't wealthy, but I didn't know this place existed. The more I looked around, the more convinced I became that this was an abandoned neighborhood, and that realization made me deeply uncomfortable. Then I heard the scream again. It sounded closer this time, and almost definitely behind me. I stopped and turned around. The road behind me was barely visible under the weak streetlights, and the silence was oppressive. Every shadow made my nerves spike. I knew I was getting paranoid and that it was time to leave. I had no idea where the road led or if it looped back anywhere familiar. Going back the way I came was the only option. I turned around and started walking quickly, my eyes locked on the road ahead, trying to get out of the wooded area as fast as possible. A couple of minutes later, I heard the scream again directly behind me. That's when it hit me. I must have already walked past whoever it was, which meant they had been hiding in the woods. I turned and saw a man standing in the road. He was dressed in dark clothing and was walking toward me. I only looked for a second before turning away and speeding up. Something about the situation felt horribly wrong. I checked behind me several times after that. Despite seeing him walking toward me earlier, every other time I looked, he was gone. It made no sense. I couldn't tell if he turned around or disappeared into the woods, but I didn't care to find out. Eventually, I made it back into the normal neighborhood. Even then, the relief didn't fully come. I still felt watched, still felt like I wasn't alone. I finally reached my townhouse and locked the door behind me, grateful to be inside. I went to the kitchen, grabbed some water and a snack, and sat at the table to calm down. That's when I heard shuffling outside the front door, followed by a heavy knock. My heart dropped. I stood up slowly and crept toward the door, listening first. I hadn't turned the porch light on, so when I looked through the peephole, all I could see was darkness and a tall shadow standing there. After a few seconds, I could make out dark clothing. I was almost certain it was the same man from the road. I backed away and quietly called 911, hoping he'd stay long enough for the police to arrive. While I was on the phone, he knocked 5 or 6 more times before suddenly stopping. When I looked again, he was gone. The officers showed up and asked questions, but nothing came of it. I mentioned the screams, and while they found it strange, they didn't investigate further. I didn't sleep at all that night. Over the next month, I kept waking up to loud, aggressive knocks at my front door. Every time I rushed to check, no one was there. Eventually, the knocking stopped, but the paranoia never fully left. I still don't know what was happening in that wooded area, who was screaming, or what that man wanted. All I know is that, deep down, it feels like I came dangerously close to being part of something truly horrible that night. A couple of years ago, I was working as a rideshare driver. I had accounts on multiple apps, but in my city, RideNow was far more popular, so that's what I mainly used. I was in my mid-20s at the time, and because the job offered so much freedom, I never managed to stick to any kind of schedule. I stayed up late most nights, hanging out with friends, or just killing time, so whenever I decided to work, it was usually overnight. That night started like any other. I logged on around 11 p.m. and knocked out a few normal drop-offs. Working that late meant I couldn't be picky. I was often one of the only drivers online, and if I skipped even one request, it could mean sitting idle for an hour. So I drove on autopilot. Request comes in. I accept immediately, and only then do I glance at the details. About 10 minutes into driving toward my next pickup, I noticed something felt off. The GPS wasn't taking me toward downtown Redwood Falls, Michigan, where all the bars, offices, and apartments were. Instead, it was pulling me farther away from town. I glanced at the map when I could and saw almost nothing. No businesses, no neighborhoods. Just a long stretch of road cutting through dark land. It was strange, but I didn't cancel. I never did. I arrived about 15 minutes later, sometime between 1 and 2 a.m. The location was exactly what the map suggested: an isolated road with nothing around it. No houses, no side streets, no cars. I thought maybe the rider's car had broken down, but I didn't see anyone. I pulled over, sent the "I've arrived" notification, and waited. No response. The longer I sat there, the worse the feeling got. Eventually, I canceled the ride and started driving back to Wartown, annoyed but accepting it as part of the job. 5 minutes later, another request came in. The pickup location was almost the exact same spot, just about a mile farther down the same road. To most people, that might have seemed suspicious. To me, it didn't. That kind of thing happened occasionally when riders messed up the pin and reordered. I figured that's what this was, relieved my time wouldn't be wasted. I accepted and turned back. When I reached the new pickup spot, I finally saw someone. A man stood on the side of the road wearing jeans, a gray hoodie, and carrying a large backpack or duffel bag. I parked in front of him and glanced behind, still nothing. No houses, no paths. I had no idea where he'd come from or what he was doing out there at that hour. He opened the door and climbed into the back seat. His drop-off location was only 5 minutes away. As I drove, he stayed quiet, but I could feel his eyes on me. Every time I checked the mirror, he was already staring. The tension in the car felt thick, and my mind started spiraling. Why so isolated? What was in the bag? Things I normally wouldn't think twice about. When we reached the drop-off point, my stomach sank. It was nearly identical to where I'd picked him up. Empty, silent, completely isolated. Before I could say anything, he told me to get out of the car. I turned around in disbelief. He saw a gun pointed directly at me. His expression was cold and lifeless as he motioned toward the door and repeated himself. I didn't hesitate. I got out. He followed and told me to walk, staying several feet behind me so I couldn't try anything. He led me off the road and into the forest. I tried talking, pleading, really, but he never responded. We walked deeper and deeper into the trees, the darkness swallowing what little light there was. Time didn't feel real anymore, but I think we walked for about 10 minutes straight. Then he suddenly told me to stop. That was when I knew I was about to disappear forever. Something snapped inside me. Adrenaline flooded my body, and I bolted. He yelled for me to stop, but I kept running, using the darkness as cover. I knew he was chasing me. His voice stayed close, but then a gunshot echoed through the forest. After that, there was nothing. No footsteps, no yelling. I didn't stop moving. Without my phone, I left it in the car, wandered blindly until I finally found a small road with a few houses. One man answered his door and helped me call the police. My car was gone by the time officers searched the area. They never found him. The rideshare account led nowhere, and I don't believe it was just a robbery. Something about it felt planned and unfinished. I kept driving for a few months after that, but I received several more pickup requests near that same stretch of road. Every time, I called the police. Every time, they found nothing. Eventually, the paranoia got to me. I quit rideshare driving entirely and found another job. I still think about that night and how close I came to never making it back. It was a rainy Sunday weekend in Clearwater Falls, a quiet town where I lived alone. I'd been stuck inside all day, and honestly, I didn't mind it. Rain always gave me an excuse to stay unproductive without feeling guilty. I was unusually exhausted that day, probably from a restless night, so I barely moved from the couch. By around 10 p.m., I realized I hadn't eaten and didn't have the energy to cook. So I decided to take a short drive and grab something from a nearby drive-thru. The rain was coming down hard, fog hanging low over the streets, and the roads were nearly empty. The entire trip took no more than 20 minutes. But as I turned onto my street, something immediately caught my attention. Every house was dark, swallowed by rain and mist-texed mine. A single light was glowing from my upstairs bedroom window, standing out unnaturally. That didn't make sense. I always turned off every light before leaving, and I hadn't even gone upstairs all day. Still, tired and focused on parking in the rain, I brushed it off without really thinking it through. Once inside, I turned on the downstairs lights, dropped my food on the coffee table, and slowly headed upstairs to turn that light off. The moment I reached the hallway, my body jolted awake. Every upstairs light was off. The bedroom was dark. All the doors were open, and there was no sign any light had been on at all. Confused, I walked into the room and stared around, not even sure what I was looking for. Standing by the window, watching rain slide down the glass, I convinced myself it must have been a reflection from my headlights. I hated myself for not checking more carefully earlier, but I forced the thought away. I went back downstairs, sat on the couch, and started eating while watching TV. Within minutes, the whole thing slipped from my mind. I finished my food and must have dozed off because I kept drifting in and out of sleep. Each time I woke up, though, I had this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. I'd scan the room, heart racing, but see nothing. Eventually, it got so bad that I turned on the living room lights. That didn't help. The next time I woke up, my eyes were immediately drawn to the dark corner near the hallway where no light reached. It felt wrong, like something was hiding there. I stood up and turned on the hallway lights too. My nerves were shot, so I decided to just go to bed. I turned off the TV, cleaned up, and started upstairs. The second I reached the bottom of the stairs, a light upstairs shut off. I hadn't even realized it was on until the hallway went darker. My stomach dropped. Slowly, I continued climbing. At the top, I looked into my bedroom, lit only by moonlight and the sound of rain tapping against the roof. That feeling was still there. I stepped inside and shakily whispered, "Hello." I took a few more steps and flipped the light switch on. That's when everything clicked. The hallway behind me lit up exactly the way it had earlier. There was no mistaking it now. And in that moment of realization, something moved. The closet door cracked open. Through the gap, I saw an eye staring back at me. We locked eyes for a split second before the door burst open and a man stepped out. He didn't attack me. He didn't run. He walked toward me slowly, smiling, trying to calm me down as if he knew me. His face was unkempt, his expression wrong deranged. I didn't wait. I bolted downstairs and straight out of the house, rain soaking me instantly. I still had my phone, and I called the police while standing in the driveway. While waiting, I saw him sprint out the front door and disappear down the road. When officers arrived, they found the back door smashed in, the lock completely destroyed. I'd never noticed because I never used that door. The man hadn't been wet when I saw him, which meant he'd been inside my house for hours. Watching me from upstairs while I sat below, nothing was stolen. I still don't know why he was there or why he kept turning the light on. I haven't felt safe since. Knowing he's still out there, capable of breaking into a home and hiding in plain sight, has changed me completely. If anything else happens, I'll update, but I hope it never does. This happened on a Monday night in Ravenwood, Ohio. I'd gotten off work around 8 p.m. and went straight home. A few months earlier, my divorce had finalized, leaving me alone in a quiet, empty house. With nothing much to do outside of work, I spent most nights gaming online with a few close friends, and honestly, I didn't mind it. That night was no different. I hopped online, put on my headset, and settled in for what I expected would be another long session. There had been talk all day about a severe thunderstorm rolling in, with flash flood warnings and high winds. But where I lived, those alerts popped up almost every time it rained, so no one really took them seriously. Around 11 p.m., while I was mid-match and laughing with my friends, a violent gust of wind slammed into the window beside my desk. The entire house shook. I lifted my headset halfway and could hear rain pounding against the roof and walls. the structure groaning as if it were bending under the pressure. I turned back to my screen to tell everyone what was happening, but before I could finish my sentence, my monitor flickered. The lights in the house snapped off for a split second, then came back on. Discord was still running, so I asked if they could hear me. Before anyone replied, everything shut down completely. My PC powered off, the lights died, and the house was plunged into total darkness. It was so dark, I couldn't even see my own hands. I felt around my desk until I found my phone and turned on the flashlight. Annoyed more than scared at first, I went downstairs and looked out the front window. Between the heavy rain and fog, it was hard to tell whether the rest of the neighborhood had lost power. Most houses were usually dark at that hour anyway. I messaged my friends to let them know I was probably done for the night. Using my phone's light, I made my way down into the basement to grab an old battery bank I kept stored away. It wasn't powerful, but it could at least run a lamp or two. As I was lifting it, I thought I heard a noise behind me. There were only stacks of boxes back there, and as the wind picked up again, I chalked it up to the storm, making the house shift and creak. I carried the battery bank upstairs and plugged a lamp into it in the living room. I've always hated sleeping with the power out, so I opened the blinds and sat on the couch, scrolling through YouTube on my phone while watching the storm rage outside. About an hour passed before curiosity got the better of me. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, which was mostly shielded from the rain by an overhang. The storm was still intense, but that's when I noticed something strange. Across the street, a couple of houses still had lights on. Their power clearly hadn't gone out. Confused, I checked online for reported outages in my area, but couldn't find anything. I went back inside, uneasy but unsure why. Only a minute later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number, saying there were downed power lines nearby and to expect outages. What struck me as odd was that it wasn't from any official service provider. No company name, no ID, just a normal phone number. I found it strange, but at the time, I didn't dwell on it. I returned to the couch, letting videos play quietly while I stared out the window. That's when I heard Ida's single footstep. It came from the opposite side of the house, unmistakably from the basement stairs. I'd lived there long enough to recognize that sound. Slowly, quietly, I stood up and walked toward the hallway, my phone's flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. When I turned the corner and shined the light down the hall, I saw nothing except the basement door was wide open. I knew for a fact I hadn't left it like that. My heart started pounding. I shined the light down the stairs, but had no intention of going down there in pitch darkness. I closed the door and stepped away, my mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. I hadn't even made it far when sudden heavy footsteps came charging up the basement stairs. They were loud, aggressive, and close. Instinct took over. I ran back and threw my weight against the door just as someone slammed into it from the other side. The door rattled violently as whoever it was tried to force it open, slamming their shoulder into it again and again. There was no lock, nothing separating me from them except my own body. Panicking, I pulled out my phone and started dialing 911. The moment I did, the pounding stopped. I heard footsteps retreating down the stairs. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, ran outside, and got into my car, calling the police as I drove a short distance away. I watched the house from across the street for nearly 10 minutes, but I never saw anyone come out. When officers arrived, they searched the house and found no one. The intruder had escaped through the back door. The most disturbing part came later when it was confirmed that there had been no power outage at all. The text message I received had come from a private phone number. Whoever broke into my house knew my number. We believe he sent that message after hearing me step outside, trying to keep me from checking the breaker box in the basement. He hadn't been targeting a random house. He had shut off my power on purpose. That's where the trail ended. No suspect, no explanation, and no peace of mind. I went on a camping trip with my best friend, who I'll call Evan. We'd gone camping a handful of times before, but we still considered ourselves beginners. Up until then, we'd always stuck to safe, well-known campgrounds where other people were nearby. This time, though, we wanted something more adventurous, real. Camping, deep in the forest, somewhere remote with a view. After doing some research, we found a campsite about 3 hours from our town in northern Oregon. According to what we found online, it required roughly a 4-hour hike to reach, and there were only a couple of photos posted by previous campers. That alone made it seem like the place wasn't very popular. We packed supplies for 3 days and drove out early that morning. At the end of a long, unused forest road, there was a small dirt clearing where we parked. No other cars were there. The trailhead barely looked like a trail at all. It was overgrown, uneven, and weathered, as if it hadn't been maintained in years. Still, we figured that was just part of being out in the middle of nowhere, so we started hiking. As we went deeper into the forest, the trail thinned more and more, but by mid-afternoon, we finally reached the campsite. It was nothing more than a grassy clearing on top of a small hill, but it offered a beautiful overlook of the forest below. It was extremely secluded, and from the looks of it, no one had been there in a long time. We set up our tents and unpacked our gear. Evan was moving slower than I was, so while I waited, I walked up to the overlook to take in the view. That's when I noticed movement in the trees below us. It was hard to see through the thick branches, but I could make out 4 or 5 figures walking together through the forest. I was shocked to see other people out there, especially since they weren't on the trail or campsite. From that distance, I couldn't tell if they were hikers, campers, or something else entirely. I called Evan over, but by the time he reached me, the figures were gone, completely swallowed by the trees. After that, we brushed it off and went back to enjoying the day. As evening approached, we built a small campfire and sat around talking. For the first couple of hours, everything was calm and quiet, just the sound of the fire crackling between us. Then we heard something else. Faint voices. Multiple people talking back and forth somewhere deep in the forest. We couldn't make out the words or even what language they were speaking, but we both clearly heard them. The voices stayed in the same place for several minutes, never getting closer or farther away. Then, without fading or moving, they suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was unsettling. Almost immediately after, we heard footsteps, just one set, approaching our campsite. Moments later, a man stepped out of the darkness and into the firelight. He was wearing a red baseball cap and had long, wavy black hair. He walked up, smiling widely, and casually asked, "Either of you know where the trail is? I've been looking for a while." I pointed toward the trail and said yes. But when he didn't leave right away, I asked if the other people we'd heard were with him. His expression briefly went flat before he smiled again. He told us he was hiking alone and hadn't seen anyone else. That immediately felt wrong. He had come from the exact direction the voices were coming from. Still, I just said okay, and after another smile, he turned and walked down the trail. Once he was gone, Evan and I sat there in silence, both thinking the same thing. The man had clearly been lying. The real question was why? Why pretend there were no others? Why hide it? We talked quietly around the fire for nearly half an hour, but the entire time it felt like we were being watched. I kept scanning the trees, the trail, everywhere. Something felt deeply wrong. Eventually, Evan broke the silence and asked if we should just leave. After a moment, I agreed. We started packing up, but that uneasy feeling only grew stronger. Just as we put our backpacks on and stomped out the fire, a single footstep crunched behind us. We both spun around. Without the fire, the forest was pitch black and unnaturally quiet. My hands shaking, I pulled my flashlight from my pack and turned it on. Standing 10 to 15 feet away was the same man in the red baseball cap. He was already staring at us with a blank expression. As the light hit his face, he slowly formed that same wide smile. Panic took over. I shut off the flashlight and we both ran for the trail. As we sprinted through the darkness, we could hear multiple sets of footsteps chasing us. Some sounded like they were running directly behind us, others crashing through the woods alongside the trail. Slowly, the sounds faded until it was just Evan and me running. We made it back to the car, got in, and drove away without looking back. It's been a long time since that night. Still don't know who those people were or what they wanted. We haven't gone camping since, and honestly, I don't know if we ever will. This happened in the spring of 2021. I was 23 years old at Latai and living away from my family while attending an out-of-state university in the Midwest. Spring break came earlier than usual that year, which meant I finally had the chance to drive home and see my family. The trip was long, almost 2 full days of driving, mostly through empty highways and stretches of road that felt endless. I preferred driving over flying though, no matter how exhausting it was. I left early on a Wednesday morning, much earlier than planned, and made great time throughout the day. I didn't have a strict route planned, only a rough idea of where I might stop for the night. I drove for nearly 10 hours straight, stopping only for gas and food. By around 8 p.m., exhaustion finally caught up to me. I pulled into a gas station and searched for the nearest hotel. I was deep in the middle of nowhere, but thankfully, I found one about 20 minutes away. The directions led me off the highway and onto an old, narrow road behind the gas station. The streetlights were sparse and barely worked, casting weak yellow glows that did little to light the road. There were no other cars around. After a few minutes, I passed through a tiny, old-fashioned town that looked frozen in time. At the very end of the road sat the hotel, a small, aging building that matched the rest of the town perfectly. The parking lot was completely empty. I grabbed my bags and went inside. The lobby lights were dim and naturally dim. The front desk was unattended. The silence was unsettling. No TV noise, no voices, nothing. After about a minute, a woman came walking out from a back hallway and visibly startled when she saw me. She quickly composed herself, checked me in, and gave me a room at the very end of the hallway. The room itself was small and outdated, clearly part of a family-run hotel that hadn't changed in decades. I didn't bother unpacking. I sat on the small sofa, scrolled through my phone for a while, and must have fallen asleep without realizing it. I woke up suddenly to violent banging on the door. My heart jumped as I shot upright and checked the clock. It was 11 o'clock p.m. I walked to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty. I stepped out and waited, staring down the quiet corridor for about 30 seconds, completely confused. Everything was silent. Eventually, I convinced myself the knocking must have been for another room. I showered, got ready for bed, set my alarm for 8 a.m., and went back to sleep. But later that night, it happened again. More pounding on the door, just as loud and aggressive. I rushed to the door and opened it again. No one was there. This time, something felt deeply wrong. I walked down the hallway to the front desk. The lobby was just as dark and quiet as before, but the same woman was sitting there. I told her someone had been banging on my door. She looked genuinely confused and then told me something that made my stomach drop. I was the only guest staying at the hotel that night. I went back to my room, locked every lock on the door, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Trying to calm myself, I reached for my phone. When the screen lit up, it illuminated the room just enough for me to see a figure standing in the corner near the bed. Someone was inside my room. They stood completely still, watching me. Panic took over. I rushed to the door, fumbling with the locks. As soon as I started opening them, I heard footsteps rushing toward me from behind. I burst out into the hallway and ran for the lobby. The woman at the desk looked up in shock and then past me. A man was charging down the hallway behind me. She immediately grabbed the phone and called 911. But before he could reach us, the man bolted out the front door and disappeared into the night. He didn't get into a car. He just ran. Police arrived shortly after and searched the hotel. There were only 2 working cameras, one in the lobby and one outside, so there wasn't much evidence. The only thing we were able to piece together was that the man had slipped into my room while I was at the front desk asking about the knocking. No one ever figured out who he was or what he wanted. I grabbed my things and left that night, not willing to stay another minute. To this day, I still have no explanation for what happened, but it remains the most terrifying experience of my life. My detached garage has always felt like my second living room. It's nothing fancy, bare concrete floor, socket sets organized by size along the wall, an old AM/FM radio that only ever finds 2 stations, and a mini fridge stocked almost entirely with cola. I spend more time out there than I do inside the house. Honestly, being surrounded by tools has always made me feel safer than being around people. Last summer, after a raccoon decided my trash cans were an all-you-can-eat buffet, I installed a motion light above the garage's side door. Bright halogen, clean sensor housing, mounted carefully so it wouldn't false trigger. I positioned it so I could see it clearly from the kitchen window. My own small security system. 99 nights out of 100, it never came on. Then came one night in November. I'd just finished rebuilding an alternator. I cleaned up, shut off the breaker that powers the garage, and headed toward the house. Before going inside, I glanced back. The light was off. Everything looked exactly how it should. Inside, I poured myself a soda over ice and let the TV play quietly in the background. That's when I saw the motion light flaring to life through the kitchen window. White light flooding a space that should have been completely black. It caught my attention instantly. I stepped closer to the window and lifted the blinds. The yard looked like daylight. No movement. No animals. No wind. The oak tree near the fence barely stirred. I stood there waiting for anything to explain it. Nothing happened. About 30 seconds later, the light shut itself off. I muttered something about the sensor being too sensitive and went back to my drink. 2 minutes later, it came on again. This time, I knew I hadn't imagined it. I walked into the laundry room and flipped the breaker that controls the garage power. The yard went dark. I waited a moment, then flipped it back on. Before my hand even left the breaker, the light snapped back on. Now, I'm not the kind of person who jumps to ghosts or anything like that. I fix engines for a living. When something behaves wrong, you test variables. So I grabbed a wrench more out of habit than intent and stepped outside. The night had that metallic silence you only get near midnight. No wind, just the distant hum of a neighbor's air conditioner. When I reached the garage, I tried the side door. The handle turned, the latch pulled back, but the door only moved about an inch before stopping cold. It didn't hit wood. It hit something soft with weight, like a shoulder pressed against it from the other side. There's no deadbolt on that door. There's no reason it should resist. I pressed again and felt a subtle give. Then a definite pushback. The kind of resistance that tells you someone is holding it. I took one slow step back. Instinct kicked in. I raised my boot and kicked hard near the handle. The door burst open with a heavy thud. A man fell backward onto the concrete, catching himself on one arm, eyes wide. He'd been leaning against the door, holding it shut. Before I could say a word, another man came out of the darkness near the fence behind me. He slammed into my shoulder and sent me down hard. For half a second, all I saw were boots and the blinding white glare of the motion light flooding the yard. Then my brain caught up. 2 men, both rough-looking, both breathing hard. Not kids, not pranksters. I rolled, scrambled to my feet, and ran. I didn't think I'd just moved. I cut across the short path to the house, slammed the kitchen door behind me, and locked everything. Handle, deadbolt, chain. My hands shook as I backed toward the counter and grabbed my phone. Through the kitchen window, I watched one man limp over to the other and help him up. They both stared straight at the house. One of them cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled, "We'll be back. We'll collect on that." Then they disappeared toward the alley. I stayed by the window with the phone pressed to my ear, describing everything to the dispatcher. 2 men, one in a dark jacket, one limping, moving west toward the fence. The motion light blinked off, plunging the yard back into darkness. Patrol cars arrived within 10 minutes, lights washing over both ends of the alley. I let the first officer inside, and we went around back together. The side door hung crooked now, one hinge nearly torn free. On the concrete floor, a faint smear of dirt led toward the alley. Someone had fallen hard. The officer crouched and swept his flashlight across the ground. "Could have gone bad fast," he said. He checked the roll-up door next. The padlock had been flipped through and snapped shut from the outside. His light caught a fresh handprint pressed deep into the dust, bigger than mine, dragging downward like someone had grabbed for balance. Boot prints overlapped near the threshold. 2 sets, one heavy, one half dragged. "You sure you didn't know them?" he asked. I shook my head. They searched the alley, but found nothing else. Just a scuffed patch of dirt by the fence where someone had climbed over in a hurry. No tools, no ladder, no vehicle. The officer took photos and filed the report. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table with the blinds barely cracked, staring into the dark yard where those men had stood. Every few minutes, I thought I saw movement near the fence, but it was just my nerves reacting to shadows. Sleep never came. Around 3 a.m., I grabbed a notepad and started writing a list. Install bolt on inside door. Move tool chest into the house. No more work after 10 p.m. Ask the neighbor to watch the alley. By sunrise, the bolt was installed and my tool chest sat in the dining room, looking ridiculous next to the table, but it made me feel safer. Like I'd closed the gap between being secure and being stupidly lucky. I told myself that was the end of it. But fear doesn't clock out that easily. That night, I was completely in my zone. Headset on, friends yelling about loadouts, a small space heater humming under my desk, parents out for the night. It was perfect. I was 17, bored, and just trying to make it through school. Our split-level house in Westfield always felt safe, quiet street, nosy neighbors, nothing ever happening. The only light in my room came from the monitor and the RGB LEDs on my keyboard. My parents were out celebrating my aunt's birthday. My mom had texted me, "Don't stay up too late," which basically meant, "Ha, I know you will anyway." Everything felt comfortably ordinary till the window went dark for half a second. Just a tiny shift of shadow across the blinds. I froze, checked the time. 11:47 p.m. I unmuted my headset. "Probably the cat," I said. Logan laughed. "Since when do you have a cat?" he asked. "Since never," I muttered, trying to act casual. But I kept glancing back at that inch-wide gap in the blinds. The reflection of the screen made it impossible to see clearly, just the faint gray of the snowbank outside and a darker shape near it. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the streetlight flickering again. The round started. I leaned back to stretch, and the shadow moved again, slower this time, like someone crouched just outside. I muted chat. The rest of the house felt eerily still. I waited for a sound to crunch in the snow, a knock, but there was nothing. I told myself not to look. Curiosity won. I lifted one blind slat with my finger. A man crouched inches from the glass, face partly hidden by a hoodie. His breath fogged the window, his lips moving, forming words I couldn't hear. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't frantic. He was talking to me. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe right away. I just froze, half bent at the window, staring while my brain tried to process it. His lips kept forming syllables, calm, focused, like he wanted me to read them. The thought alone made my chest tighten. I backed away quietly. My headset crackled with Logan shouting about a revive, and I flinched, the chair squeaked. The man stopped moving his lips. Then he turned his head, listening. I slid out of my chair, grabbed my phone, and crouched by the wall. I didn't go near the glass again, I dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? My voice came out flat. Someone's outside my window. He's crouched. He's watching me. The dispatcher asked for my address and told me to stay on the line. Can you move away from the window? She asked. Already did, I whispered. From the corner of my eye, I could still see faint movement, the rhythm of his head as he breathed, fogging the glass, erasing it, fogging again. He's still there, I said. Are your doors locked? Stay on the phone with me. Officers are on the way. I edged down the hall, keeping my back to the wall. The floor creaked once. I froze. The dispatcher kept asking grounding questions. What color hoodie? Which direction was he facing? Could I see his hands? Gloves, I said. Both hands on the sill. There was a pause. Stay where you are, she said. Don't try to get a better look, as if I would. Then came the sound I'll never forget. A soft tap on the glass. One fingertip, then a slow drag like tracing a line. Not a knock, not aggressive, just communication. He wanted me to react. The dispatcher must have heard something in my silence. Is he trying to talk to you again? Yes, I whispered. My mouth was dry. Officers are close. Keep quiet. Through the blinds, headlights swept the living room walls. Someone turning onto our street. The man outside turned his head toward it. His hood shifted just enough for me to see part of his face-light skin. Stubble, maybe late 20s. His mouth stopped moving. Then came the sound of snow compressing one step, two, and he disappeared from the window. I didn't move until the dispatcher said, "They're there now. Do you see red and blue lights?" The glow pulsed across the blinds. I nodded, then remembered she couldn't see me. "Yeah," I whispered. Two officers came to the door. One tall and calm, the other smaller, younger. I led them to the room. The taller one pointed his flashlight at the window. "You open this tonight?" he asked. No. He angled the light across the screen and frowned. That's when I saw it, a clean rectangle, the size of a book, cut into the screen. Perfect edges, razor sharp. He used the tip of a pen to push it. It fell inward, soundlessly. The other officer came in holding a small plastic cap. "Found this in the mulch," he said. "A piece of a utility knife." They swept the yard. Faint footprints led to the window and looped back, like someone doubling their trail. No car tracks. No neighbors awake. They wrote the report. The whole thing took maybe 30 minutes. My parents got home halfway through. Mom panicked. Dad tried not to. The officer explained calmly. He suggested adding a dowel to the sliding doors and moving my desk away from the window. My dad pushed the couch against the window. My mom made hot chocolate, because that's what she does when she doesn't know what else to do. I sat staring at the blinds, replaying his lips, the fog of his breath. It wasn't "help me." It wasn't "please." It was slower, almost conversational. "I can see you." That's the phrase my brain keeps landing on, even though I never actually heard it. The next day, I moved my desk to the opposite wall. Took half an hour. Stupid maybe, but it helped. Facing away from the glass made it easier to breathe. I tried gaming again, couldn't focus. Every flicker in my peripheral made me twitch. Logan asked, "You good, man?" "Yeah," I said, then logged off early. For months, I replayed that moment, the faint fog of his breath, the movement of his lips, the control in it. He wasn't trying to break in immediately. He was testing me, seeing how close he could get, how long he could hold my attention without me calling for help. Locks didn't explain that. Patience explained that. Observation explained that. Fear doesn't end when the danger leaves. It finds smaller ways to linger. Now, whenever I pass that window, I look away. My mom eventually moved the couch back, said the living room looked weird. I let her, but my desk stayed facing the wall. That night rewired me. And every time I see my reflection in the glass after dark, I think about that man kneeling in the snow, mouthing words I never heard, and how close I came to finding out what they were. Old houses talk. That's what I tell people when they visit and comment on the noises. Mine says hello on step 4 and complains on step 9. It's like a living metronome, keeping rhythm with my nights. I'm a grad assistant at Lansing University. Between grading freshman essays and paying rent that eats half my stipend, I've learned to love quiet. My roommate Ethan usually fills the apartment with noise music. Microwave beeps, chatter, but he was gone that weekend visiting his family, leaving me alone with a drafty house, a pot of coffee, and 70 pages of unpolished student writing. The dining table was my grading station. Laptop, mug, highlighter, stack of essays, everything in its proper place. From where I sat, I could see the hallway and the start of the staircase, half lost in shadow. Step 4 had its distinct creak, low and round, like a throat clearing. Step 9 was higher pitched, almost irritated. You could tell who was coming or going by the way those steps sang. That night was cold enough that the windows fogged with frost. Thermostat set to 65 to save money. Only company, the heater humming and the wood adjusting with little groans. A normal winter night in an old house until 1:13 a.m. The sound came from the hallway. One clean creak. Step 4. K. Ethan, I called out. You back early? Nothing? I waited for the follow-up. The shuffle of shoes, the slam of a bag, the complaint of step 9. Silence. The house cooled a little lower. Maybe I just noticed it more. I rubbed my wrist, listening. Houses settle, I told myself. Wood expands. Excuses expand too. I went back to the essay. The radiator hissed. The fridge clicked. Normal sounds. Then it happened again. Step 4. Identical pitch, identical tone. You don't get the same note twice unless something stayed there. I set my pen down, the heater clicked off, and the silence felt louder. I listened for footsteps, continuing or retreating. Nothing. The air felt charged, like the house was waiting for me to respond. Half curiosity, half nerves. I grabbed my phone and opened the voice memo app, hit record, and set it on the table. If there was another sound, I'd have proof it wasn't imagination. 30 seconds. Then a minute. The house didn't breathe. Then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible shuffle, like fabric sliding against wood. Someone shifting on the stairs. I stood slowly, reached for the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a pen. Funny how small confidence becomes when the world shrinks to the edge of a doorway. The staircase waited in the dark. I could see the top half of the stairs, but not the risers. A light switch sat at the bottom. I stared, debating. If someone stood there, they'd see me reach. Enough, I said. I flipped the switch. The bulb flooded the stairs in light. No movement, no shadow. Just 12 old steps rising into stillness. The brightness only confirmed what darkness hid. I was alone now, but not convinced I had been alone before. I stayed 10 seconds, listening so hard my ears felt pressurized. Then I started climbing, 1 foot at a time. Step 1, 2, 3, fine. Step 4 groaned under my weight, the exact same note. Halfway up, I felt a draft across my ankles. Reaching the landing, I turned toward the back hallway. From there, I had a clear line of sight to the kitchen and back door. It was open 3 inches, held only by the small chain limiter we never bothered to remove. The door rocked slightly in the cold. I didn't rush. I stood still, staring at the tiny wedge of black beyond the doorframe. My body acted before I could think it through. I walked quietly back down the stairs, then turned left into the kitchen. The air was colder there, my breath visible. The door swayed slightly against the chain. I reached for it, then stopped. A faint smear of snow dust lay across the threshold, just enough to show where a boot might have slipped before leaving. I eased the door closed until the latch caught and the chain slackened. The house exhaled, or maybe that was me. I called the non-emergency police line. "What seems to be the issue?" "I think someone was inside," I said. Back door open and I heard something on the stairs. "Any sign of forced entry?" "Not really, just something feels off." She told me to wait outside near a light. I grabbed my coat, boots, and stepped onto the porch. Within 5 minutes, a patrol car pulled up. I walked the officer through it. "Latch plates have been shaved," he said, crouching to show me. The screws around the strike plate were bright silver, freshly worked. This wasn't wear and tear. Someone had tried this door before. He shone the beam toward the fence bordering the alley. Boards loose, just enough for a foot to slip under. Snows disturbed too. I offered, "Kids." He didn't look up. Maybe? Or someone testing houses. He scribbled in his notebook. Then, replace screws 3-inch ones this time. Add a bar if you can. Put a chime on the door at night. It'll wake you. Routine maintenance. He made it sound, but I could tell he didn't like what he saw. The second he left, it got weirdly quiet and not calm. Just too quiet. I walked through the house again, noting every floorboard complaint, every step that sang sharper. I pressed on the back door, saw how far the latch seated before catching. Then I sat on step 4 and listened to the house breathe around me. That night, I slept on the couch with the sink light left on. No sudden jolts awake, no nightmares. Ethan came back the next weekend, laughed when I told him, then went uneasy when I showed him the latch plate marks. We bought longer screws and installed a heavy door bar together. He tested step 4 afterward. "House still says hi," he said. We laughed, but it didn't sound natural. People think the scariest part of a break-in is danger. It isn't. It's the idea someone stood inside your private silence and learned your routine. They knew which step talked first. They chose when to make it talk again. I don't know who they were or what they wanted. I only know the back door chain didn't hold, and one board in the stairs still flexes under pressure. I still test it with my boots sometimes. Old houses are unpredictable, but they don't lie. Wood creaks from temperature. It shifts under pressure, but it doesn't repeat the same note twice in perfect unison. That's human weight. That's someone deciding whether to move or wait. Finals week turns everyone into a zombie. I was surviving on iced coffee, energy bars, and blind hope. My apartment in Colombia was tiny, just a bed, desk, and a closet with a door that never quite shut all the way. Every time I looked up from my notes, that thin line of darkness between the door and frame seemed to stare back at me. It sounds stupid now, but that night it really started to bother me. Before settling into my study session, I got up, pushed the closet door until it latched, and wedged one of my sneakers against it. Problem solved, or so I thought. By 1:47 a.m., I was half asleep over my laptop when I heard a click. I looked up. The closet door had bled open again, just a sliver, maybe half an inch. I stared at it for a while, waiting for it to move more. It didn't. Still, something about that tiny gap felt wrong. I told myself it was just the hinge, maybe a draft from the fan. But I still snapped a picture and sent it to my mom with a text. "Your paranoid daughter is losing it again." I closed the door one more time, wedged the sneaker tighter, and went back to studying. At some point, I must have drifted off at my desk. When I opened my eyes again, it was 4:03 a.m. The room was dark except for one light. The closet, soft bluish glow, pulsed from inside. My phone sat on the desk beside me. Whatever was glowing in there, it wasn't mine. The sneaker I had wedged against the door had been kicked aside. The door was wide open, and I could see faint outlines of my clothes swaying slightly as if air was moving from inside the closet outward. Then came a sound. A fingernail tapping on plastic. Every muscle in my body locked. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just stared into that glow, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The light shifted, dimmed, then brightened again, like someone adjusting a phone flashlight. I backed toward the bathroom, grabbed my phone, and slipped inside. The second I turned the lock, I called 911. My voice was shaking, barely audible, but the dispatcher stayed calm, asking me to stay quiet and describe everything I'd seen. I told her about the light, the door, the sound. She instructed me to keep the door locked until the officers arrived. While I whispered into the phone, I heard movement, soft footsteps crossing my carpet. They stopped right outside the bathroom. My hand shook so badly the phone brushed against the tile, and the tiny noise felt deafening in the silence that followed. Then I heard the faintest exhale, like someone breathing through their nose. The dispatcher must have noticed my tone because she told me the officers were close. Within minutes, the stillness broke. Doors banged open, voices shouted, "Police?" Heavy boots rushed down the hallway. When they reached my apartment, I unlocked the bathroom door. The officers swept the place quickly, guns drawn. One of them opened the closet and immediately called for backup. The fire escape window had been cracked open. Muddy footprints trailed across the sill and down the wall outside. Inside the closet, under a hoodie I didn't recognize, sat a cheap burner phone. The screen was still lit, the flashlight app running. One officer picked it up with gloves. "Used this to see," he said. "I know SIM card." They inspected the window. Latchet was bent at an angle, screws loose. Whoever it was had pried it open just enough to slide in. They dusted for prints only, partials, smudged, incomplete. That night, the officers stayed until sunrise, walking the perimeter and checking neighboring buildings. They didn't find anyone. When they left, they advised me to stay elsewhere for a few days. I packed a bag and went to my friend Lila's place. A week later, I moved apartment's top floor. This time, no fire escape, new locks. Some nights, I still wake up completely still, my eyes drifting toward the closet, waiting for that blue glow. But once you've seen a door open on its own and realized someone else was behind it, you stop trusting quiet nights. You start sleeping lighter, and you never, ever leave the closet door cracked again. People always say breakups hurt because of silence. No more late-night calls, no texts lighting up your phone. For me, silence was never the problem. The problem was realizing that silence doesn't always mean someone's gone. Her name was Samantha. We had been together for 3 years. She was passionate, unpredictable, and had a way of making you feel like you were the center of her world. At first, I thought that intensity was love. But over time, it felt less like being wanted and more like being watched. When I finally ended it, she didn't cry or beg. She just said, "You'll feel me again before you forget me." I brushed it off as something dramatic people say when they're hurt. I blocked her number, boxed up her things, and tried to get my life back to normal. That winter, I was recovering from a minor surgery and sleeping lightly because of the meds. My apartment in Portland was quiet, warm, and finally starting to feel like mine again. It was around 2:19 a.m. when I woke to the mattress dipping near my knees. Not the casual shift from moving your legs, this was deliberate pressure. Like someone was sitting down carefully, trying not to wake me. I stayed perfectly still. The room was dark. I listened, waiting for the familiar hum of the furnace or the pipes, anything to explain it. Instead, I heard breathing. Soft, deliberate, close enough to move the hair on my neck. For a few seconds, I convinced myself it was me. Maybe my CPAP machine had shifted. Maybe I was half dreaming. But the rhythm didn't match. Minute came between my breaths. I whispered, "Samantha." Nothing. The air felt heavy. Just as I reached for the lampchain, the breathing stopped, as if whoever it was knew what I was about to do. I hesitated, then I yanked the chain. The lamp flicked on, flooding the room with light. No one. The spot beside my legs remained indented, deep enough to hold its shape. Strangest of all, the sheets were warm. Someone had just been there. That's when the smell hit me. Vanilla mixed with cigarette smoke. Samantha's perfume, she used to drown herself in it before bed, said it made her dreams sweet. I got out of bed fast, scanning the room. The door was shut, windows locked. Everything looked untouched. Still, the scent lingered. I checked the living room, kitchen, even the hallway closet. Nothing. I told myself I was overreacting, maybe memory, nerves, or leftover perfume on something she'd left behind. Then I went back to the bedroom and noticed the bathroom door was open about an inch. I'd closed it earlier that night. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the black gap. I thought about walking away. Instead, I took one slow step forward and nudged the door. It creaked slightly, and from inside came the faintest sound, a single inhale. That was all it took. I slammed the door shut, twisted the lock on my bedroom handle, and dialed 911. I whispered everything to the dispatcher. My voice shook so badly she had me repeat the address twice. She told me to stay locked in, keep quiet, and wait for the officers. While on the phone, I heard movement. They were still in the apartment. I pressed my back against the door, holding the phone tightly. I didn't move until the distant wail of sirens reached me. The footsteps stopped. Then came banging on the front door. Police? When I opened the door, the bathroom door was wide open. The officers swept the apartment, guns drawn. They didn't find anything at first. Then one officer checked the hall closet I rarely used and called for backup. There she was, Samantha, pale hair, matted, wearing the same hoodie she'd taken when she left me. Her eyes looked glassy, unfocused, like she hadn't slept in days. She didn't scream or fight. She just looked at me and whispered, "You left the window unlocked." They took her out in handcuffs. When they searched her bag, they found a set of my house keys, the spare set I thought I'd lost months earlier. Later, they told me she'd been living nearby, sleeping in her car behind an old strip mall. She had broken in 3 nights in a row, waiting until I was asleep before coming out from the closet or hallway. They believed she was watching me. That night, I didn't sleep. Not after the police left. Not even after the sun came up. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the window. She had mentioned the latch was slightly bent. 2 weeks later, I moved apartment's new building, top floor, new locks, no fire escape. Now I keep a chair propped under my doorknob at night. I sleep facing the door. And every time I wake in the middle of the night, I listen not for creaks, not for wind, but for breathing. Because I know what it sounds like when someone who used to love you decides they can let go. The scariest part isn't the night she came back. It's knowing that for weeks before, she had already been there watching, waiting, breathing beside my bed.